In our thing, I referenced Independent Bible Study by Irving Jensen that you can get on Amazon. It's an old book, but you can it's still very useful. He says take a piece of paper and draw a box in there, and only put the text in the box, and only you could put your comments, other stuff on the outside margins, but keep the text in the box so you see it separate. Okay, you can do it that way. So I desire, therefore, that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and disputing or doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves. Now, if you're looking at this grammatically, you see that there's a distinction between what he tells the men and when he says, in like manner, the women over here. He's setting those two things apart from each other. Here are the men and here are the women. He's setting them apart. You can physically put them apart on the page then. And so I put the box around, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere. Now you could break that down. I could have put that men pray, and I could have put everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. The three things modify the praying. First of all, maybe four, but the men are doing the praying. I believe, here, I'm going to throw this in, not here. It seems to me, you can judge, is this praying, private praying at home in their closet, or public praying? That's a question. Because men can pray in two different ways at least. Read in this context, and you can answer it later, what do you think this praying is? Given the context, when it says everywhere, what's it talking about? I think it's talking about public prayer. Okay? But that's a debatable point. Just leave it off for a second. So the men are to pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. Three things about the prayer. They're to pray everywhere. That means in all circumstances, at any place. I think some versions say men pray in every place. I think the King James and maybe the New American say, or American say, in every place. And how do they do this? Well, they do it by lifting up holy hands. The Jews prayed like this. Okay? The Jews lifted up their hands. See, but you have to lift your hands when you pray. This doesn't say lift your hands when you pray. This says lifting up holy hands. The holy is the important part here. Okay? That speaks to their behavior and character. And they do it without wrath and doubting. Now, we can go back and look at what does that mean. But you see how that rather than get focused on the holy hands or the wrath, you see you're linking it back to the praying. So he tells you, that's why I got lines showing that the men praying has these three characteristics. Now he says, in like manner. So I got a dotted line over there on the other side of the page. In like manner. What does in like manner mean? In the same way, or a bigger word, correspondingly, corresponding to the men praying everywhere, the women should adorn themselves. That's weird, isn't it? How does praying everywhere correspond to adorning yourself? Well, you got to keep reading because we don't know the answer to that quite yet. They are to adorn themselves. Other versions usually besides adorn. Adorn is from this word, I believe, cosmios. It's used about 3 or 4 times in this thing. We get cosmetics from this, by the way. We get the cosmos. We get cosmological from the same word, I think. It means orderly or properly. It means an arrangement. When you put on cosmetics, you're arranging your face. That's what you're doing. You're adorning your face. That's how the Greeks would view that, arranging it. Okay? So women are to adorn themselves. How? What means? All these big phrases. Well, with propriety and moderation. How do women adorn themselves today? They do it with a makeup brush, lipstick and rouge and foundation. That's how they were doing it then. We have the examples archaeologically. That's the way they were doing it then. He says to these women, they're to adorn themselves with, or using, the word with means using as a tool or a means of something, propriety and moderation, and not See the contrasting arrows? And not braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. So the adornment of the Christian woman is to be in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, and not with this. There's the contrast. With this, not this. So I should have had I missed a line here. Give me 1 second. I'll fix that. I say I'll fix. Give me just a second. I'll fix it. I see this now. Okay. See there, I put in a little line between adorn and modest. You see that? So, they're to adorn themselves in modest apparel. That's what they put on. That's so that they're in it. They're in the modest apparel. And they do this, or the apparel itself is with propriety and moderation, not these things. But, here's the contrasting arrows, which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. So the with good works modifies the godliness, or it affects that, it's linked to that. And the contrast is between the braided hair, gold or pearls, costly clothing, and then what's proper for women professing godliness. There's also a line between propriety and proper, because they're very close. And between propriety and adorn, because it's the same word, nearly in Greek. You see the contrast here? It's a verse of contrast and delineation. Now then he makes an application of this. His application is, let a woman learn in silence with all submission. That's his application. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. Now I break it down and I say, let a woman learn. What does the word learn contrast with? There's a contrast in this passage between learn and something else. What is it? Praying, teaching publicly. Praying everywhere, learning in submission. That's the contrast. Now my point would be, whatever else we say about what this verse means, if I'm listening to somebody talk about this verse and they don't make that contrast between men praying everywhere and women learning in silence, then I don't listen to what they say, because they didn't get it. They didn't understand the passage. The passage makes a contrast between men praying everywhere and women learning in silence with all submission. That's the contrast. Now, we can interpret that. I mean, we can make different applications historically and in different churches. I'm not arguing that. We can discuss those. But when you don't get that contrast out of it, you've missed it, in my opinion. And then he goes on to say, and, he emphasizes this even more, and I do not permit a woman to teach. So there's the praying, there's the learning, there's the teaching. Now, you have a contrast. I should have put a contrast between learning and teaching. She's to learn in submission, and she's not to teach or have authority over a man. So there's a contrast there. But to be in silence. So here's silence repeated again. Here's praying everywhere, out loud, publicly, and here's silence. Now, what we usually focus on are two things in this passage people focus on historically, in my experience. They focus on the clothing, and they focus on whether a woman can speak in a public assembly or teach a Bible class or something. And those are proper questions for discussion. But this passage gives you a series of contrasts that are very strong. These are not mild contrasts. They're very direct contrasts. And my point to you would be, regardless of where you fall on the line of what a woman should do, you need to take these contrasts into your thinking very seriously, because that's where the Holy Spirit put them. He put them there. So you should have in your mind that this is a serious contrast I have to take into account and not just dismiss it. Well, that's just patriarchal. That's just a custom. It was just a custom of churches not to let women speak. Really? That's what it was? Is that what this passage says it is? Just a custom? It doesn't seem to be that way. So you have to. So you can take another position. I'm just saying you can't. You have to get to your other position you take by coming through the text. You got to get through the text, and there's barriers in the text to making any old interpretation you want because of the contrast being made. Now, to me, the chart helps you see that. And I will say even this. Can I lean back? Yes. I got to make sure first. I know this six-pack ab here looks like it would be able to hold me, but I don't have confidence in it. Anyway. What was I going to say? Hang on. It's coming back to me. In interpreting this passage and seeing what it means, when you dig in here, you begin to see three things. I desire that men pray everywhere, in like manner that women adorn themselves, and let a woman learn in silence, and do not permit a woman to teach. You see at least three things, maybe four things, that are contrast with each other. Now you can ask yourself, so what does this mean? Why did Paul say it this way? What does this mean? Well, then that's a good question. But don't dismiss it as if it doesn't mean anything, if you want to take the Bible seriously. And don't add to it either. Don't add something to it that's not there. That's another problem that we run into. So, now I'm not really thinking about the other thing I was going to have, but praying, learning, and then not permitting to teach are the three. I should have underlined the word teach, but to be in silence. You see all the contrast in there. Anybody have a comment about that? You see how I made the chart? Do you think the chart reflects the grammar, the thought of the paragraph? Or is it me making up stuff out of thin air? Now, I don't think I'm making this up. I think I'm showing you how the text is put together. Now then, you go from there, the point I would make about the cross-reference thing is, you go from this and digesting this, you're going to have to put other passages next to it at some point to come up with a proper place for it to fit in, but you can't just... Now, I made another chart. I didn't have time to read. I just found this chart, and I didn't find it in time. I thought I looked for it. I couldn't find the whole chart. So I made another chart that I do by hand. I like to make them by hand. It's harder to do them on the computer. So here's one I made just of that part of this verse. Can you see that? Or is it hard to see? Let me look at it. Then I'll know. All right. I have an arrow pointing up to the men. And that means go back to the previous chart to see what he said about the men. Then he says, because where does the phrase in like manner refer to? When you see a phrase in like manner, what should you do? What should you do in your head? Stop and go backwards. Because when he says in like manner, he's meaning, well, there's something over here like this. What did he just say? So you stop when you read accordingly or therefore or in like manner. Those are words that point you backwards to what he just said. You go back and look at that, what he said about the men. Try to digest that. In like manner, now this is the American Standard Version, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefastness and sobriety. He used the word shamefastness instead of, I think, propriety there. Not, the adorning is not with braided hair, gold, or pearls, or costly raiment, but which becometh women professing godliness through good works. So this is a simpler snapshot in the middle of this to show the contrast. So the women are to adorn themselves, and here he tells you in what way or how, with modest apparel, shamefastness, sobriety, but not with this, but with this. Now that's not obvious sometimes to some people when they read this. The words are unfamiliar, like shamefastness or moderation or modesty. They're unfamiliar, and so we get caught up in that and not. The big words in this passage are not and but. And the other one too. The real big words here are the buts and nots in this passage, because that's showing you the structure of it, the contrast of it. Anybody got anything to say? You're not going to help me out here?
Just getting ready to comment about the braided hair and the gold and apparel. Obviously, that was an issue in that area that Paul was telling Timothy, that telling people to get away from all that. So that was, I would say, the normal societal dress or mode of women presenting themselves in public. And he's saying, once you become Christ, you're not supposed to do that.
Well, now, a not but construction in grammar is not always an absolute necessarily between the two. It's a comparison. It's a comparison between two things.
Sure.
So sometimes it means not at all. Sometimes it means in comparison to. So I've heard people say, well, you can't have, because there's another passage that just says here, if you compare another cross-reference, it just says clothing. It doesn't say costly clothing, it says clothing. Well, you mean if you can't have braided hair or gold or pearls or clothing, well, what are you supposed to wear? Is he saying be naked? Now, but that's not the point of this passage, really. The difference is that and you're right, Stuart, in ancient Greece and Rome, and I have some slides on this. I wasn't going to teach about this passage, but I have some slides that show the super ornate hairstyles of these Roman and Greek women with all kind of jewels and gold encrusted in them and all that stuff that they would wear all the time. And they wore their clothing a certain way with pearls and all costly things. And this is how they thought what it meant to be a woman. If you go on Instagram and TikTok, what does it mean for the younger women in particular to be a woman? What is it? Well, it's tight pants with big bottoms and all kind of tattoos and gold and makeup. They spend hours and hours on the makeup and that false eyelashes and all this stuff, because this is what it means to be beautiful and to be a woman. Our culture is no different in this than ancient Rome was. What?
I don't think that this means that women can't braid their hair. They can't braid it all fancy with pearls and stuff.
No, but it's saying that this is not your focus, Doug. You're right. This is not. I don't think this is saying you can't wear some pearls. But I think it is saying that if that is your focus as a woman, you're off base completely. If your false eyelashes and your makeup define who you are as a woman, and you think that's what it takes, and to look at the women who focus on that. Boy, it's judgmental. Brace yourself. Judgment warning here. Do you find that those women are the people that are really solid in character and integrity and spirituality? Those women that focus on all these kind of external things? Do you see that? I don't see that. I see that those are, as a man, I see this, those are the shallow people. I had a girlfriend one time, and I still friends, and I don't say this in a harsh way in any way, but I'd go pick her up, and blah blah blah, and we have a good time, and other times we wouldn't have a good time. And I would tell her, I told her one day, I don't think she liked it then, I know, and you won't like it now. I said, honey, I said, when I come to pick you up and you come out of the house, I can tell whether we're going to have a good time or not, whether we're going to have a nice date or not. When I see you, I can tell. How could you tell? I said, well, if you have your hair all done and you have a lot of makeup on and all that, we're going to have a lousy time, because you're in your feelings. There's something bothering you and you're covering up Vicky. You're covering up who you are to me. And we have problems. When you come out of the house and you're just yourself, no makeup, regular hair, regular clothes, we have a great time, because you're really you. It isn't men that want women to have fancy hairstyles and a lot of makeup. Men do not like that. Who likes that? Women and other women like that, but not men. Men like a woman to be what she is. And my wife is beautiful without all that, always has been. I don't care about any of that. Does she wear makeup sometimes? Yes. Does she do her hair done once in a while? Yes. But that's not, but I know we're not going to have a good time if her hair, I can't even touch her, couldn't it, for crying out loud. You know, might mess up her hair or something. Now, you men all know what I'm talking about. Does it create closeness or distance? It creates distance. Now, what Paul is saying here is, as a Christian woman, adorn yourself in modest, which means appropriate, proper apparel. And it's not this, is not the apparel you should be focused on, but propriety and moderation are the clothing. We say, well, you know, when I go to the beach, a bikini is proper. That's what you should be wearing there. Okay, that's not the definition of, well, that meets one definition of modest or proper. What's the true definition of modesty in this verse? Fitting the circumstance of going to the beach? No. It's fitting a woman professing godliness. That's the standard. Does your clothing match, or is it proper or fitting or modest for a woman who's professing godliness through good works? That's the question you got to ask. And I can't be your judge on that, but that's the question you got to ask. Does it fit me as a woman professing godliness, or does it fit another kind of woman, an Instagram model? Which one does my dress and attire fit? Or one of these workout girls? Which one does it fit? You got to decide. You got to figure that out. And so that's the real. Now I say this is a difficult passage. You know why it's difficult? Because it's hard. This is a hard passage. It makes people uncomfortable and nervous, men and women, really. Here and okay, but because the men, he says about then, they're to pray everywhere. In other words, they're to be leaders. They're to be there leading in the proper way, and they have to have holy hands, not dirty hands, not hands without any integrity, but holy hands when they do what they do, and they have to do it without anger and wrath and bitterness and doubting. The word I think I like the word disputing better than doubting. I think disputing is always fighting over something. That's the idea. So the men are challenged in this verse too, as to the type of leaders that they are and what they do. And so, and the truth is, a lot of men simply will not lead. They will not teach. They will not lead. They want the women to do it. That's the big problem. Or the other side of the coin is they stifle whatever women can contribute and help with, and they denigrate the women. You have two extremes here, and they're both not scriptural and not good. A church that doesn't promote and value the women's contribution and use that and work is not a church that's doing the work of the Lord. A church where the men sit back and whatever the women want, whatever makes mama happy is what we're going to do, is not what the Lord wants. Now, I'm interpreting this passage for you. But what I want you to get out of making the chart, if you were to do a chart like this, you would see the contrast is being made. And well, the other thing I want you to see is learn to put the subordinate phrases, the phrases that are descriptive or explanations, put them aside for a moment. You can read this passage, I desire therefore that the men pray everywhere. In like manner also women adorn themselves. Let a woman learn in silence, and I do not put a woman. You can read just one sentence out of that passage. So you need to not to focus on, we talked about it, but the focus of this passage is not being against braided hair or gold or pearls. That's not the focus of this passage, per se. Focus is bigger than that. Might come in. We had a fellow, is that the second bell?
Yes.
Oh man, I was going to tell you a great story. You're just going to have to miss it. I probably told it 10 times before already, but be that as it may. All right, we have to stop. I want you to see the value of the chart. And what's really valuable is when you do the chart yourself. That's what's really valuable. However crude it may be, now look, you can spend hours making even this simple, this seconds. You can spend a long time to come up with that. And that's good for you. That's what you need to do. All right, thank you very much.